The Magic Man of Cedar Hollow. What you will learn: how a traveling trickster rebuilt a dying town by selling a dream, why the people clung to that dream, and what it really cost him and them in the end. Author, storyteller M. Rays. Introduction. Imagine a place so worn down that even the rain feels tired. Into that place walks someone who refuses to speak the truth everyone expects. Instead, he gives the people a fairy tale they can live inside. This is the story of how illusions can feed a starving town, and what happens when the dream starts to digest the dreamer. The freight tracks that ran through Cedar Hollow used to rattle with coal and promise. By the 90s, the coal was gone, and the rails sat quiet as fence posts. The main street looked like a mouth missing most of its teeth, boarded windows gaping. Kids left the day they turned 18 and mailed postcards that said, "Don't worry, Ma, I'm fine." Families kept those postcards wedged on mantles because hope is lighter than lumber. Eli Briscoe watched it happen from the old feed store he'd inherited. He sold birdseed to the same 12 people and waited for a miracle advertised nowhere. One August dusk, a stranger stepped off the Greyhound with dust on his boots and a suitcase small enough to hold secrets. He asked Eli for a bottle of water and paid with a coin that looked older than dirt. The stranger said his name was just Leo. Eli noticed Leo's smile never reached his eyes, like a porch light with nobody home. Leo rented the abandoned dance hall for a month, cash in advance. He painted the door crimson and hung a banner that read "Future Guaranteed." Folks figured he'd open another bar and failed to care. Then Lee nailed a poster to every telephone pole. The poster claimed that inside the hall you could step into tomorrow, while today waited politely outside. On the bottom line, he wrote admission free, but donations feed wonder. The first night, only 6 people showed. Leo dimmed the lights so low, the walls themselves seemed to lean in. He twirled a glass orb that cast blue shapes across the ceiling. He spoke of a valley where workers earned double wages and drank lemonade that never lost its chill. He described trains that ran on light, pulling prosperity like ribbons. When he finished, Martha, the oldest soul in the room, wiped her eyes and whispered, "I'd like to live there." Leo answered, "Then keep coming back." Word spread the way gossip outruns truth. By the next week, the hall was packed shoulder to shoulder. Leo told stories of instant houses that assembled themselves, of doctors who cured with songs. He never promised these miracles for Cedar Hollow. He just let the pictures bloom in their heads, like dandelions nobody asked to plant. Each night a donation box filled faster than rainwater. People left lighter, as if burdens had slid off their coats. Eli came too, standing in the back, arms folded. He told himself he was only guarding his neighbors from folly. But when Leo spoke of fruit trees that bore different flavors every month, Eli's stomach felt warm cider. He dropped $20 in the box and pretended it was loose change. Outside the hall, the town stayed broken. Roofs still leaked, kids still left, and the post office shortened its hours. Yet on Leo's nights, the people walked taller, humming possibilities. Conversations shifted from layoffs to what color they paint their imaginary new homes. Police reported no vandalism on Tuesdays because everyone was too busy dreaming. After 3 weeks, Leo invited the town council on stage. He claimed they would vote to invite investors from the Miracle Valley. The councilmen, dazed by applause, nodded like bobbleheads. He produced a glossy sheet titled Cedar Hollow Renaissance Plan. It was mostly blank space dressed in gold ink. He told them to sign quickly, while destiny felt welcome. They signed, even the mayor who couldn't spell Renaissance without stuttering. Eli felt a tug in his gut, a fishing line snagged on something alive. He stepped forward and asked, "Where exactly is this valley located?" Leo met his eyes and answered, "Location matters less than direction." The crowd swallowed the line like cake. Eli walked home under a sky that felt lower than memory allowed. The next morning, Leo was gone. So was the donation box, the signed sheet, and the mayor's ceremonial pen. The hall stood empty, its crimson door beating bright in sunrise. People searched his rented room and found only dust shapes where the suitcase had been. The realization hit like sudden hail. They had paid to stand in their own wishing. Betty, the school secretary, gathered everyone in the street. She admitted she'd given Leo her late mother's ring, the one she planned to pass to her daughter. Her voice cracked like old leather. Others confessed wallets lightened, heirlooms vanished. Shame thickened the air until breathing felt like sipping gravy. The mayor tried to speak, but shame is louder than any microphone. Eli felt the town's humiliation seep into his boots. He leaned against the warped clapboard wall and inhaled the sour smell of lost trust. Then something inside him straightened, like a spine remembering its purpose. He walked to the hall, opened every window, and swept the floor. He borrowed paint from the hardware man and covered the crimson door with plain white. He wrote a new sign, "Tomorrow starts with us, free coffee." People drifted in, expecting nothing, but Eli gave them hot mugs anyway. He said, "Leo sold us a future he never owned. Let's build when we can walk inside." Voices stayed quiet, yet no one left. Eli asked each person to name what they could give, not coins but skills. Martha could sew, the Jenkins boys knew carpentry. Betty kept records faster than rain. The list grew like ivy across a chalkboard. A week later, they fixed the post office roof. By Thanksgiving, the boarded windows on Main Street sported fresh boards cut straight. Kids helped paint murals showing coal trains replaced by gardens. Nobody claimed miracles. They just showed up with hammers and stayed until dusk. Investors never arrived from a non-existent valley. Instead, people invested Saturday mornings and spared dollars and sourdough starters. Eli still thought about Leo during quiet hours. He understood the power of the dream had mattered, even if the dreamer lied. Hope bottled and uncorked can intoxicate better than gin. But a town drunk on fantasy walks off cliffs unless someone maps the ground. He promised himself never to sell illusion again, only inventory and effort. 5 years later, Cedar Hollow wasn't paradise. Some nights trains still didn't run, and kids still moved away. Yet the town had a farmer's market, a tool library, and murals nobody wanted to whitewash. The census showed the first rise in population since 1986. On the anniversary of Leo's scam, the hall hosted open mic storytelling. Eli took the stage last. He told the truth about the stranger, the coin older than dirt, the vanished ring. He admitted how easily he'd wanted to believe nonsense. Then he pointed to the crowd and said, "Each of you stayed and worked and refused to let shame be the town's final chapter. That is the only magic we need." Applause sounded different now, built of calluses and steady wages. Eli stepped down, lighter than any dream had ever made him. Summary: fantasies feel safe because they demand no effort, only belief. Leo gained power by shielding the town from painful truth. Yet the same fantasy, once exposed, almost crushed them. Real power returned when Eli used the craving for hope to spark real action. Remember, people will follow illusions, but the leader who replaces illusion with achievable work builds something no trickster can steal.